when writing JavaScript code, it is a good practice to always stick with a coding conventions. By sticking with the coding conventions, it helps you to, troubleshoot and find where there could be an exceptions or error easily in your code because of the same coding convention in a project or in a code exercise like that. Now, when you are writing code in JavaScript, there are some conventions that you can follow that can guide you in order to minimize the risk of inconsistent coding conventions in your code. What exactly is coding convention? Coding conventions are style guidelines for programming. So when we are talking about coding conventions, we are talking about style guidelines, like something that guides you on what to do and what not to do in your programming exercise. They typically cover things like naming and declaration rules for variables and functions. So when it comes to declaring name and when it comes to rules for name declarations for variables and functions, sticking with a style guide or a coding convention can help you to be consistent in how you name your variables and how you name your functions. Another thing, number two, is that rules for the use of white space, indentation, and comments. For example, in JavaScript, if you write code without indenting it, it will not affect the execution or the running of such code. Or if you write the code without indentation, it will still work. But there are some programming languages that respect the concept of indentation. And if that indentation is not found, then your code can easily throws an error. So how do you get to know about all this? You get to know all about all these true coding conventions of a language that you are working with, because these are the guidelines that guides or that is expected of anyone who happens to be programming in that language. Now, number three says programming, they typically cover programming practices and principles. When it comes to programming, there are practices and there are principles. And coding convention also covers programming practice and principles in order to guide whoever or anybody that is working with a language like that. Coding conventions secure quality. They improve code readability and they make code maintenance easier. Like I said earlier, that if you follow the same coding convention or consistent styles and guidelines in your code, it can help to streamline errors and can help a lot with debugging, especially when you have issues in your code. It can make maintenance much more easier and improve your code readability due to the fact that your code will be following the same convention when it comes to naming, when it comes to principles, when it comes to practice, and when it even comes to syntax in your code. Coding conventions can be documented rules for teams to follow or just be your individual coding practice. So the coding convention we are talking about here, it can be as large as something that is documented for a team to follow, maybe a set or a team of developers in an organization. They can have a coding convention that is expected for everybody that is part of that team to follow anytime they are building something or working on any project. And it can also be as small as something that you as a professional or as a developer always chooses to follow whenever you are writing code or you are doing anything inside the language. So these are what coding conventions helps you achieve in your code. Now let's look at general rules for complex statements. Now, the general rules for complex compound statements is that you put the opening brackets at the end of the first line, you use one space before the opening brackets, you put the closing bracket on a new line without leaving spaces. Do not end a complex statement with a semicolon. Now, what is this talking about, or what is this saying? Now, let's take a look at an example for each of these. Firstly, I want to start with variable names. When it comes to naming your variable, it is very important that you use descriptive names that mimics what you are trying to project. For example, instead of saying let X equals to John or to Holmes like this is not descriptive enough. But if this represents a first name and I do something like this, you can see that this is a lot better, and it will even tell me anytime I come back to this code to let me know that the value here represents the first name of a person. So working with variable descriptive name is very important. And instead of using generic naming convention, it's always good to use the name of what you are trying to, declare in the variable. For example, if I want to set a price, if I name it price and do like this is a lot better than using generic name and do something like let xy, or let xy is 36 or xyz, which might not denote what exactly I'm trying to depict in my code. Imagine I have different use cases or different places in my code where I use xyz, or if my convention is not consistent, maybe I use xyz in one place and in another place I use price. You see, this can create a confusion. So it's always very good that you follow the same convention in your code so that can make your code more easier to maintain and more readable. Another thing is spaces around operator. So when you're working with operator, it's always a good practice to add space. So if I say I have operator like this and I say x plus y, you can see this is more readable than if I have something like this, x plus y. It is not that it will not work, but you can see the difference between this second one and this. So one is more easier to read and one looks elegant, but the other one, on the other hand, looks squashed together. Not that it will not work, but you can see that a code like this will be difficult to maintain than the first one that I have here. You can see if you have your variable declaration, your expression like this, you can see how difficult this can be to work with. So spaces are important around operator. Also code indentation. So when we have something like a function, now indent it to Celsius and then do something like this. So you can say, okay, return maybe a or anything that you want to return. You can see it makes it very easy to read. Now the statement rules state that always end a simple statement with a colon. When you have a simple statement, always end it with a semicolon. For example, let's say we have an array of cars. Look at this. You can see it's more legible to read. So always end a simple statement with a semicolon. It's very, very important. And this example that I show now are what I'm talking about here, about the general rules for complex statement. That when you have a complex statement, you put the opening bracket at the end of the first line. So what that means is if you have a complex statement, for example, let me use the function example I just used now. Variant. Now we put the opening bracket at the end of the first line and then one space before the opening bracket, and then you open that new bracket. Once you open that bracket, you put the closing bracket, which is this one, on a new line without leaving spaces. And when you have a complex statement like this, you don't need to end it with a semicolon like this. It's okay like this. So all the properties that you want to add to it, you can just put it inside this place and it will make your code more readable and more easier to maintain.